Do you have 6 months to sell your properties before they're worth absolutely nothing? Well, recently a Bigger Pockets post asked that very same question. It got a lot of attention and it sure did get my attention. So I did some digging and this is what I found. Stay tuned. So what could this post possibly be talking about and why should you care? Well, listen to this. The post states that during the 2008 housing crisis, the housing market bottomed about 2 years after the peak in delinquencies. The delinquencies were very much so correlated to the unemployment rate. I'm going to show you the graph that he's talking about. He's 100% right. Unemployment is already about twice the peak it was in 2008, so it's very likely that delinquencies will follow, which will lead to increased supply of housing. So we're going to get into that in just a second, but I want to start off by telling you that unemployment is at about, give or take, 14%. 40 million people are out of work right now. This is insane. We've never seen anything like this. But the reason why a lot of people are unemployed is because most people, well, not most, some people are actually electing to be out of work.
You get the picture? I am unemployed.
If we didn't have government interference or assistance with the pandemic unemployment assistance, which is the $600 that everyone gets on a weekly basis who's unemployed, most people would probably be out there looking for another job if they were laid off.
To collect unemployment, you gotta not be working at what you're working at before you stop working. What you talking about, Will?
But we're not going to lose that PUA until July 31st, so we're not really going to know the full effects of what the unemployment rate is going to be. Some people are actually stated that the unemployment rate could actually climb to 16% in the summer once the PUA is done, which is even higher than what we have now. But let's get into some of the data. So the study that he is referencing is a study that was done by Stanford University. And what it states is that for every 1% in unemployment that goes up, we lose about 3% in home values. From January till now, home prices are relatively flat across the country. As you know, real estate is pretty local, so some areas will be affected more than others. But so far, the data tells us that we really haven't been impacted. But remember, what the post stated is that sometimes it takes up to 2 years to feel the full effect. And he's 100% right. I looked at the data, and we didn't bottom out in the last recession until about 2010 and into almost 2012. All right, so let's look at this. What's different from the last recession to this recession? What are the major differences? There's 3 major differences that I found. One is that right now, currently, we still have a massive undersupply of homes. We don't have enough inventory for families that have been created. There's been about 10 million new families that have been created since the last Great Recession, and there's only been about half of the supply that needs to be available to meet the demand of those new families. So we're still very much at an undersupply. Okay, so the other major difference is that in the last recession, we had a ton of foreclosures. This time around, what we have is what are called forbearances. The forbearances are basically the time period in which the bank is allowing you to not make mortgage payments. And during that time, you will not be responsible for any of those payments. It's not going to be reported as late payments, but they will be reported as a side note stating that you're in a program, which could affect your credit score as well. But the worst part of the forbearance process is that most banks are expecting you to make that payment, that lump sum payment, as soon as your term is up. So let's just say they gave you a 3-month term. Those 3 months of payments are going to be due on that 3rd month once it's over. So if you're watching this and you're currently in a forbearance, you're going to want to call your bank and make sure that that's not the case. Now, my experience when I called Chase to do some research for a previous video, they told me that yes, all the payments will be due once the 3rd month is up. And I said, what if I don't have the money to pay for that at the 3rd month? They said, well, then you're going to have to go into modification. So let's just say the home is worth 100 grand and they lumped everything in, and now you have $200,000 worth of debt on a property that's only worth 100. A few months down the line, even though the payment might be manageable, you're going to start to realize, wait a minute, I'm just paying into something that has no value whatsoever. So that was a real big mess, and that may happen again once these forbearances turn into modifications. Then the modifications will turn into foreclosures. That's the one to look out for. Next thing I want to talk to you about is that previously we had a lot of evictions and we had a lot of foreclosures, and now there's a moratorium on these things, which is going to further prolong the actual free market to take effect. Now, the free market is basically allowing the market and businesses and people to fail or succeed based on their own merit. Some people will, some people won't, but at the end, what's going to happen is that you're going to have a healthy market. People who can't afford their homes or people who have lost their jobs will eventually go through foreclosure. But what's happening right now is that we're not going to see the full effect, even maybe longer down the road than what we did last time in 2008. Now, another thing I want to talk to you about is that not all markets are going to be created equal. There are some markets that are actually going to take a harder hit than other markets. And the reason I'm saying this is because, as we know, this pandemic has affected the industries of hospitality, leisure, and travel big time. So what are some of the states that actually lead that type of industry? Well, number one would be actually Texas. Number two is Nevada. Number three is Florida. Then we have three other states that I want to mention. We have California, we have New York, and we have New Jersey. I had to sneak New Jersey in there because I want to tell you, I lived in New Jersey basically my entire life, and it is not a really good place for business.
Right from work, I went to the bar.
What I'm starting to realize is that some of these markets, especially the first three that I just mentioned, which are Texas, Florida, and Nevada, are actually going to experience a boom in other categories because there's a lot of business owners and there's a lot of people who are actually moving out of California, New York, and New Jersey and heading into those other three states that I just mentioned. So along with those people are going to come more job opportunities, there's going to be more demand, there's going to be just more everything because the more people are concentrated in one area, home prices are going to go up. So those areas may not get affected as much as the last three states that I mentioned because taxes are really high, extremely high. As a matter of fact, California, New York, and New Jersey are actually rated as the highest states in the entire country for taxes and the unfriendliest states for business. Okay, so let's talk about why we are in good shape. There's people who are saying that the economy is actually in good shape. It's not going to happen. One of the reasons is because homeowners have actually taken their homes off the market at a rate of about 150% more than what they did last year around the same time. So what that has done is it actually shrinked the housing supply from 3.6 months of housing that's available to about 3.1 months of housing available. So let me explain this to you. 6 months is kind of like the break-even point where it starts to change between a seller's market and the buyer's market. If you have more than 6 months supply, it starts to become a buyer's market because there's more supply on the market. So buyers can be more choosy and picky and they can actually get better deals. They can actually lowball sellers at that point. But if it's a seller's market when there's less than 6 months supply, then what happens is that buyers end up paying more than the homes are actually listed for, and people are actually fighting over the same homes, which drive prices up. We are currently right now in a definitely seller's market. We have 3.1 months supply. Last year at the same time, we had 3.6 months supply. So the trajectory is actually headed in the opposite direction for prices to fall. So we may not see a decrease in home values for quite some time. All right, so a lot of people are speculating, analysts are stating that there's not going to be such a great hit because builders haven't built enough housing. And we talked about this earlier. And right now, I feel like that problem is actually being exacerbated because I don't know too many investors who are actually buying raw land. I don't know too many investors who are buying projects right now to build new homes. And I'm just telling you this from my personal experience. If you're in real estate, I'd love for you to leave it down below in the comments. Let us know, are you seeing new home builders building more homes? You know, we can take a look at the stats and we'll do a follow-up video on that. But personally, I am not seeing that. So here I'm going to list, and I have a lot of reasons why we are probably in trouble, why we're probably in big time trouble, and we may see prices drop much more than that. Previously, before this pandemic, you were able to get an FHA or a VA mortgage with just a 580 credit score. But recently, those credit score requirements have actually raised to 640 and 660 respectively. But in Chase's loan programs, you now have to put down 20% and have a 700 credit score to even apply for a loan with Chase. So make sure you look at other places before you end up going to Chase. Other segments of the mortgage market that have been greatly affected have been people who are self-employed, people who are actually taking out jumbo loans, and people who actually are investors. So if you're an investor and you're watching this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. All these loans are all but disappeared is what I can say. It's very difficult to get them. And the reason why is because these types of loans are not federally backed, which means that if you go bad on these loans, the bank may have no recourse but to just take back the property, which is the collateral. And in some cases, these properties may be worth a lot less than what they lent you the money on. So that's why these loans are so hard to get and were the first ones to disappear once the pandemic started. But the irony of all this is that interest rates have not been this low basically ever. In like the last 50 years, we have not seen interest rates as low as they've gotten, which is about 3.23% on a 30-year fixed mortgage. And even though it's so low and the interest rates are dramatically better for a borrower, it's been reported that it's about 16% more difficult to get a loan now than it was just back in January or February of this year. Now, why are banks doing this? Why are banks making it so hard for someone to get a loan? Now, this is what I found. Lenders are actually predicting that forbearances will go up within the next 6 to 12 months. You see, lenders are not like you and me. They don't really speculate, right? They do data. They have people who are actually consultants who actually go out there and look at what things are going to happen or what trends are telling them. And they are trying to hedge their bets against you going bad on your loan. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, well, what if I go bad on my loan? It's okay. They're backed. They're federally backed by the government, right? So why should they care? Well, the reason why they care is because if you go bad in month number 1, they can still sell that loan to Fannie or Freddie. If that loan has been originated after in February to May, it could still go bad and Fannie will pick it up, Freddie will pick it up. But the problem is they'll pick it up at a big discount. They're going to actually deduct 5 to 7% of whatever that loan is worth.
What are you talking about, Willis?
You know, banks are not in the business of losing money. They're in the business of making money. So this completely throws a wrench in their model. Now, if your lender is also your servicer, it even gets worse because some lenders do service a loan for a while and then they sell them off. And if your lender is also a servicer, they're actually on the hook for even more losses. What that means is that your servicer is actually responsible for making the mortgage payment to the actual note holder with Fannie and Freddie who is going to buy it. They are actually responsible for making upfront mortgage payments and then they go and collect the mortgage payment from you. But remember, if your loan goes into forbearance, they actually have to keep making the loan payments even during your forbearance period. Now, Fannie and Freddie have actually stated that they will not make a servicer pay more than 4 months of the forbearance before they step in and actually bail them out. But 4 months multiplied by how many people are actually taking out loans could take a lot of servicers under. So next thing I want to talk to you about is that Fannie and Freddie are actually joining us in being broke. What I mean by that is that Fannie and Freddie are actually reporting that they only have 2 months worth of working capital on their books because so many people are in forbearance. So what does that mean? Is Fannie and Freddie gonna need a bailout from us, from the taxpayers like we did last time? Well, actually not. The Federal Reserve actually has stepped in and they've committed to buying what's called RMBS, the residential mortgage-backed securities, from Fannie and Freddie to keep them solvent. And this is good news because it keeps the wheels turning and it keeps the real estate market healthy because now they have liquidity. They can get rid of these loans. This has never been done before. So if you're thinking about selling your home, it may be a good time to do that because all it takes is for the Federal Reserve to say, we're good, we're not buying any more. Things could take a big change for the worst. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about is that Fannie and Freddie actually only account for 50% of the loans that are actually made within the United States. The other 50% are done by local lenders, and local lenders are not getting bailed out by the Fed. How is that going to affect us? Well, remember, if 50% of the loans are made by local lenders, that means that $1.7 trillion worth of loans could be on the hook. And if these lenders start to go bad, guess what that means? Another huge bank bailout like we did in 2008. All right, so I've given you a lot of scary statistics. Now let's talk about some of the 3 things that are very apparent and very clear in what I'm talking about. First of all, we know that there is a decrease in values coming up. We know, everyone pretty much agrees on that, but we don't know how bad it's going to be. So that is yet to be seen. Number two, there's actually a mortgage crisis that a lot of people are not aware of because most people are not talking about it. So this is something that we all have to keep our eye on. The mortgage crisis that is not being talked about, that's just brewing right now. And the last thing is that there's definitely a banking bailout that is going to take place. Maybe not right away, but definitely down the road very soon, we're going to see a banking bailout. How bad can things actually get? Well, one of the things I want to do is I want to break it down with math for you. I want to show you the real numbers. So our pre-pandemic unemployment rate was at 3.7%. Now, the Congressional Budget Office just predicted that unemployment can get as bad as 16% during this summer to 2020. It can get really bad. 16% is even worse than what we have now. What that means is we have about a 12% difference. Let's just round the numbers. We have a 12% difference in what it could possibly, how bad it can possibly get. So if we use a 12% difference at a factor of 3 to 1, which is for every 1% that unemployment increases, we feel a drop in values of 3%. That means that we can see a 36% decrease in home values.
What are you talking about, Willis?
Which is completely insane. Now, if right now, I'm going to give you some more stats. Right now, Zillow, which is basically the most accurate place for home values, right? I don't know how many people agree with me, but let's just use their data. They state right now that the average home price across the United States is about $248,000. If we feel a 36% decrease in value, that means that home prices can drop down to about $160,000. You might think to yourself, hey, this guy on YouTube, this guy Louis Leyva, he's crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, I just want to remind you folks, and I just want to maybe some people who just got into real estate not too long ago, that if you just look back at the last Great Recession in 2008, home prices did just that. They went from 200,000 to about 140,000, which represents a 30% decrease in values. And remember, unemployment wasn't as bad as it is now, or as bad as it's gonna get. And home prices dipped down 30%, and it took about 2 years for that to happen. So this time around, it could be very similar once we work out all our issues with the undersupply of housing. Previously, I did a video in which I outlined that home prices tend to actually grow and increase in value with inflation. So what that means is that inflation is roughly about 3 to 5%. And whenever real estate prices go past that increase, they always tend to drop back and catch up with what inflation is. And when we did that study and when we did that research, what we found is that home prices are actually 30% higher than where they should be according to the inflation graph. Okay, so now we actually have two different sources that are telling us the same thing, that the market is due for a correction, a crash, whatever you may call it. But in conclusion, this is what I want to tell you. Personally, myself, I am going to be selling off a lot of my assets, the ones that I feel like are marginal, and I'm going to keep just a few of my best assets, and I'm going to take that cash and park it on the sideline. I might keep it in treasury bills, I might diversify into maybe some index funds, but I'm definitely not going to keep that money in housing, because as you know, housing is one of the most illiquid assets you can have, which means that it's very difficult to get your money out. You have to put it on the market, you have to pay a realtor, you have to do market, it's a whole process to get your money out of it. So I'm not telling you what to do, and I'm not telling you to sell because there's a looming crash. I could be wrong for all we know, but I'm going to be selling the majority of my assets, and I'm going to keep it in cash. Because why? Because when the crash does come, I'll have the ability to then scale up, which means that I might be able to buy bigger assets that I never had the ability to buy before, such as buildings or maybe even the stock market, who knows? But I'm definitely going to be liquidating right now. Now, I want to hear from you guys. If you think that right now we're looking at a crash coming soon, leave it down below in the comments. Let me know how you feel about it. Or if you think that we still have a few years ahead of us before we see any correction whatsoever, let us know about that too. Now, I also want to remind you guys, we are growing our real estate group into all 50 states. So if you're in real estate or you want to get into real estate and you want to join the best group in the entire world, I'm going to leave a link down below in the description section where you can actually get in touch with me and we can chat to see if we're a good fit for you and you're a good fit for us. So I'd love to hear from you guys. So click the link down below. Additionally, we also want to remind you that we're still collecting money to feed hungry American families. As you know, right now is a bad time for most, but it's a terrible time for some. And lastly, guys, we also want to remind you that if you're enjoying this content and you want to join our community, please consider subscribing, hit that notification bell, and most importantly, share this with a friend who needs to hear this information. So if you want to find out about the last 10 real estate crashes and how inflation can play a big part in where home prices are going to be, you're going to want to watch this video right here.